Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is Ukraine War, I guess breaking news update, a sort of update on what took place last night and really in the last 24 hours with regard to this new law that was passed and appears to have been signed off by Zelensky himself, meaning that this is a thing. This caused a whole slew of Ukrainians to come out onto the streets in protest, which is a good thing. It shows that democracy is alive and well, that they are able to do that there are freedoms, political freedoms. So rather than be overly critical of that happening as a concept, it is good to see protests on the streets of Ukraine. During a time of martial law, of curfews, there were still people out past the curfew protesting this. So in principle, that is a good thing. Let's remember that. That wouldn't be able to happen in Russia. Okay, but now let's think about what this is all about. Well, first of all, the Parliament passed a bill destroying, as here the Kyiv Independent phrases it, destroying the independence of key anti-corruption bodies. The bill was passed with support of 263 lawmakers, while 13 voted against it and 13 abstained. So the first thing to note, as I said last night in my live stream with Jonathan Fink, is that this was a huge parliamentary majority, and you had the Servant of the People party of Zelensky coming together with a couple of other parties, including the pro-Russian opposition, to pass this bill, and that's interesting. So there was only a small minority of people who were voting against it. Why is that? So this is brought by the politicians, and it successfully passed the Verkhovna Rada fairly easily. So that's interesting. So what was the bill? So the bill looks to curtail the independence of these anti-corruption organizations. So earlier in the day, the Ukrainian parliament approved amendments that grant the prosecutor general, so i.e. someone associated with the Zelensky government, general new powers over investigations led by the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, NABU, and cases led by the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, SAPO. So the step comes as Ukrainian authorities ramp up pressure against the two agencies established as part of the anti-graft reforms after the Euromaidan revolution. So Euromaidan revolution came along in 2014, 2013-14. That brought about a change in government. Yanukovych went his own way, and there were reforms brought about. There needs to be independent anti-corruption processes that will also allow Ukraine to jump through hoops to get accession to the EU, and also get funding from, I assume, there's a bit of speculation going on my part here, but I assume some of the funding they get from, say, the IMF, G7 and whatnot, comes with strings attached where they have to be transparent and showing to be anti-corruption. And this is a move arguably in the wrong direction, and that might upset the apple cart with regard to funding, EU accession, and generally from the people in Ukraine. So the bill was passed with the support of 263 lawmakers, 13 voting against, 13 abstaining, and the legislation made its way to Zelensky's desk for approval or veto. But as that happened, protesters gathered in Kyiv. Then it came about that he had actually signed it. Under the new bill, the Prosecutor General has the authority to issue directions in NABU's investigations or even reassign them outside the agency. It would also allow the Prosecutor General to delegate SAPO's powers to other prosecutors. Among other new powers, the Prosecutor General could also close NABU's investigations at the legal defense's request. In a video address delivered after midnight on July the 23rd, Zelensky said he had met with the heads of NABU, SAPO, and Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, and the Prosecutor General, Ruslan Kravchenko. Quote, the anti-corruption infrastructure will work only without Russian influence. Everything needs to be cleansed of this. So we're going to come onto what Zelensky has said in more detail. But this came on the back of investigations into NABO and SAPO and people affiliated with the organization and indeed the SBU, and there was found to be Russian influence, and this is kind of at the heart of the controversy. So there were these searches on NABU concerning worries that they had been infiltrated by the FSB. As the Euromaidan Press reported yesterday, the law was adopted amid high-profile searches at NABU, where security forces uncovered an FSB agent working inside the bureau who passed information to Russia. Now, this is an important quote because this is from a NACO senior researcher, Tetiana Nikolayenko. So NACO are the Independent Anti-Corruption Commission, so another one of these organizations. Yesterday, we saw SBU's searches that showed NABU is not perfect, and that is true. But today, these searches have been used by the authorities to dismantle an independent anti-corruption investigation. So, we have a situation where there is a genuine issue at the heart of these anti-corruption organizations where they are, I say arguably, but it does seem like they are compromised to some degree by the FSB. And that is a big no-no. And so the government are going to want to clamp down really heavily on that because these anti-corruption processes can be weaponized by the FSB. That's how I would read it. I'm no expert, so, take everything I say with a pinch of salt for sure. But it seems like there's genuinely an issue there. But the question is, can that genuine issue be co-opted by people who would like to centralize power for the government so that they get to dictate how these anti-corruption investigations go? And then if any of their own come under scrutiny, can they divert attention away from their own? That is the very real concern here. So here's another Euromaidan Press article. Ukraine's parliament votes to gut anti-corruption agencies amid Russian spy scandal. There is a lot of strong rhetoric. So, are these anti-corruption agencies being gutted? Well, they're not being gutted. So I would argue that that's quite an emotive headline there that doesn't quite do justice to what's going on. Now, some people who be pro the government approach here will be saying that they are lightly reforming these entities, and others will be saying they are denuding them of power. So the SBU's case against NABU. So the most serious allegations involve Viktor Husarov, a NABU employee arrested without bail until at least the 20th of September. He's suspected of state treason and unauthorized handling of classified information, according to the SBU. Husarov allegedly transferred sensitive data about Ukrainian law enforcement personnel to Russian intelligence. The SBU, has also named Ruslan Magomedrasulov, another NABU detective, as a suspect in a separate case. He is accused of aiding his Russian father in smuggling hemp to Dagestan, concealing his father's citizenship, and sharing confidential information with Fedir Kristenko, a fugitive former Ukrainian MP allegedly linked to Russia's FSB. Authorities allege that Kristenko ran a covert influence network inside NABU and exploited internal connections to assist business people in fleeing Ukraine. So there's also this idea that there's a evasion of conscription, evasion of mobilization network, and someone, I think, inside NABU was offering $300,000 not to prosecute and allow them to continue effectively. So there's bribery as well. More than 70 NABU employees were raided. Some cases reportedly stemmed from minor issues such as past traffic incidents. NABU claims many searches were conducted without court-approved warrants. The SBU maintains that the Ukrainian law permits urgent investigative actions without prior judicial approval in cases involving treason or national security. Quote, "We must let the SBU present evidence in court," says former SBU deputy head Viktor Yahun. Anyone can point to Russia. What matters is whether the accused were acting on official orders from Russian intelligence. Right, so what happens in this law, it allows it. So the hidden clauses would subordinate SAPO prosecutors to the Prosecutor General, not to SAPO head, allow the Prosecutor General to reassign NABU cases, remove the legal ban on stripping NABU of its investigations, let the Prosecutor General close cases unilaterally, even those involving top officials, require NABU's director to get the Prosecutor General's permission to claim jurisdiction. So you can see that it really does actually give the Prosecutor General an awful lot of power here over the investigations. That is definitely a concern. I would absolutely agree that is a concern. As we hear from a chap called Ihor Chalenko, political analyst, the Prosecutor General now holds all the key levers, deciding jurisdictional disputes, transferring cases between agencies, and selecting which prosecutors lead investigations. So for NABU, this means expanded powers, but increased dependence. Detectives can take over cases from other bodies, but only with the approval of the Prosecutor General. They may also investigate their own staff, including top leadership. SAPO's autonomy narrows further. The Prosecutor General now appoints case supervisors, including at senior levels, and can override prosecutorial decisions, even in politically sensitive cases involving MPs or ministers. Chalenko said this isn't just a technical wartime fix, it's a lasting centralization of authority over Ukraine's law enforcement system, including its anti-corruption agencies. Okay, so that is the nub of what's going on here. But the thing is, I mean, this got a lot of support from Parliament. So my question is often, not about, whether this is right or wrong, but why this came about and why the government and the administration and those MPs would make such a decision that would surely have controversial elements to it that would cause people to come out onto the streets and protest and could jeopardize future aid and relationships with, say, the EU. Like, that's a really big thing to have done. So why would you go to the extent of doing this? That's the million-dollar question. Ilya Ponomarenko, former Kyiv Independent journalist and author, says, absolute shame to Zelensky and his cronies, who are now openly ruining the agency of the anti-corruption institutions in wartime. This is not going to happen. Well, it looks like it is and has happened. Zelensky signed into law the law 12414, putting NABU and SAPO under Prosecutor General control, undermining their independence, says no reports. He defended the move. The anti-corruption infrastructure will work only without Russian influences. Everything needs to be cleansed of this, and there should be more justice. Okay, so we're going to come on to Zelensky's position here. Now, there is some potential light at the end of the tunnel, I guess, for those who are against this law. Lawmakers are seeking constitutional court review of the law, curtailing the independence of the anti-graft agencies. Lawmaker Yaroslav Zhelezniak claimed that procedural rules were violated during the bill's passage, making the constitutional challenge viable. So that could be an option. Tim White said The Economist claims that its sources, quote, suggest the trigger for the bill. So this is the why did it happen. And this is so important to understand, I think. They suggest that the trigger for the bill may have been the opening of NABU investigations into the dealings of presidential office insiders. This one will run for a while yet. So my position is it's going to be one of two things, I think. One, people associated with the administration were going to be or were being investigated. And that was a big problem. And in order to keep the government, scare quotes, clean, or to keep the government functioning without investigations into them, you need to change the way that these investigations take place. The other option is that there is genuine influence from Russia and that these institutions are compromised and they need to be cleansed. And the only way they can be cleansed is if the government can have oversight over them to rid them of the people who are running them, who are compromised by the Russians. Now, both of those are really plausible, and it seems that there is at least evidence that there was compromise in these organizations. As we heard from that NACO representative, there was admission that, yeah, it's not perfect. NABU's not perfect, and there is compromise, but etc., etc. Whereas the Zelensky government saying, yeah, they are compromised, and we're going to do something about it, and it's going to be big and sweeping. And I guess that's where we are. So the Ukrainians took to the streets last night. We know how to stand up for our rights. Ukrainians protest law threatening anti-corruption institutions, says the Kyiv Independent. Veto the law, they were chanting. If he doesn't veto it, it's like spitting in the face of every mother, wife and child who's lost a loved one at the front. It's trampling the memory of all those who died for our freedom, dignity and independence, 40-year-old lawyer Marina told the Kiev Independent at the protest. Today, we are essentially returning to January the 16th, 2014, a time when the country faced the threat of dictatorship. So people definitely not happy with this. Quote, unfortunately, this is happening again now without any explanations to the public, and all of this is taking place under martial law when many citizens are unable to protect their rights. Definitely not happy. In fact, as you can see here, almost all of these people are young people, so that is probably worth noting. Protest signs, I'm fed up, get your hands off NABU. The F I need a system that works against me, veto the law, Ukraine is not Russia. And those targeting Zelensky's chief of staff, Andriy Yermak. So Yermak is a very divisive figure. He's the presidential office, in charge of the presidential office. He is Zelensky's right-hand man, but often seen as the power really in the Zelensky administration. He is quite divisive, a bit like Marmite. Some people think he has kind of overreach, and he might be the bogeyman in this. He might be the person pulling the strings with regard to this law. So that's something to look into. Volodymyr Kulik, 62, a professor at the Kiev School of Economics, said it's the least one can do when the authorities betray the people, when the independence of anti-corruption bodies is discredited and put in danger. The Ukrainians have this tradition of protesting in the street, and now during the war it's problematic because, strictly speaking, public gatherings are prohibited. But as you can see here, people believe it's better to violate a minor provision of the law than to let the authorities be unpunishable and omnipotent. These decisions jeopardize Ukraine's prospect of EU integration, so we are unhappy when Hungary, for example, blocks our EU integration, but this law will block our EU integration even worse. So yeah, people definitely not happy, and it's trying to work out exactly what is going on here and what the rationale is for such a risky decision on the government's behalf there. So here, this source, Stavana, says, Yermak, go F yourself. That's what the Ukrainians are chanting here, and there's a video of them chanting that. This phrase is also used as FU. Anyway, Yermak is certainly the target of some of this ire. Yaroslav Trofimov says it's no exaggeration that Ukrainian public opinion is in an absolute firestorm after the parliament today approved a law essentially dismantling independent anti-corruption agencies just days after the SPU raided key investigators. The law isn't enacted until Zelensky signs it, which he has now, and there is huge pressure from within Ukraine and from the EU on him not to do so, but alas, he has. Everything needs to be cleansed. Zelensky has defended the law dismantling the anti-corruption bodies, although it's not dismantled them, it is changing how they work. The anti-corruption infrastructure will work only without Russian influence. So let's see then what he has said. So this is Zelensky, I guess a transcription of sorts of what he said in this video. It's been a long, emotional day, he says. So his statement, not the video, be interesting to read what he says in the video. I spoke with the NABU director Semen Krivonos, SAPO prosecutor Alexander Klemenko, prosecutor general Ruslan Kravchenko, and head of the security service of Ukraine Vasil Malyuk. We discussed various challenges. The anti-corruption infrastructure will work, only without Russian influence. It needs to be cleared of that, and there should be more justice. Of course, NABU and SAPO will work, and it is important that the Prosecutor General is determined to ensure that in Ukraine, the inevitability of punishment for those who go against the law is actually ensured. This is what Ukraine really needs. The cases that have been lying dormant must be investigated. For years, officials who have fled Ukraine have been casually living abroad for some reason, in very nice countries and without legal consequences, and that is not normal. There is no rational evidence, no rational explanation for why criminal proceedings worth billions have been hanging for years. There is no explanation why the Russians can still get the information they need. Important is without Russians. Important is, so I guess he means it's important that this is done without Russians. It's important to have an inevitability of punishment, and that society really sees it. Now, all of that sounds to me fairly sensible, right? And I get that, right? Why are these oligarchs or these corrupt people not being prosecuted who are living outside the country, having very nice lives? How's that allowed to happen? We must absolutely stop Russian influence in these organizations. Now, I agree with both of those points, But is this the best way of obtaining those objectives, right? That's the $1 million question. That's another one. Now, the problem is you will get people, I think bad faith actors will use this as ammunition to attack Ukraine. Here's Marjorie Taylor Greene doing exactly this. And it is utterly unacceptable because she lies through her teeth. So Marjorie Taylor Greene, a representative from Georgia, says huge protests erupt in Kiev against Ukrainian President Zelensky. So this is not true. They were not against Zelensky. They are against the law that at that stage hadn't even been passed by Zelensky. Anyway, she says huge protests erupt in Kiev against Ukrainian President Zelensky as he is a dictator and refuses to make a peace deal and end the war. That's not what they're protesting about whatsoever. Good for the Ukrainian people, throw him out of office, and America must stop funding and sending weapons. Now, the unfortunate thing is, this is being weaponized, but it's not even being weaponized. It's being distorted to the point of lying about what's going on there. I mean, that to me is absolutely egregious of Marjorie Taylor Greene. And I think, well, I'll show you what I said in a second. Jimmy Rushton, who's a security analyst in Kiev, says, unsurprisingly, Marjorie Taylor Greene is lying. The protests had absolutely nothing to do with Zelensky, quote, refusing to make a peace deal or, quote, ending the war. I know because I was actually there. And he says he's in the video, like he's literally in that video. Now, this is what I said. You font of disinformation and lies. This is not what the protest was remotely about, you liar. Someone should sue your ass. You got loads of people piling in. Andrew Mikado, F you, Moscow Marjorie. Pekka Kaliniemi, Marjorie's lying again to push a shitty political agenda. Jimmy Rushton, who spoke above, said, I was at this protest and I'm in this video and can categorically say this is completely false. No one person or sign at this protest mentions Zelensky refusing to make a peace deal to end this war. Stop lying. And Jonathan Fink is my favourite one here. You're an ignorant effing scumbag. These people are fighting for democracy and transparency, something you'd know nothing about. They're not seeking to be denied weapons and erased by Russia. So don't pronounce shite about things you understand nothing about, you vile scorpion. I love it when Fink gets a bee in his bonnet. Jürgen Naudit, German journalist, says her profile on X says she is Christian mother congresswoman, but it doesn't mention that she's one of the biggest liars in the USA. This post is the best example. Everything she says is a lie. With such politicians, the USA has managed to become a stinking banana republic in just a few weeks. So he's obviously pretty angry with that. Okay, so this can be weaponized and will be weaponized. Here's Andrew Perpetua going to town on Zelensky, right? So this has really incensed a number of people, Andrew amongst them. Zelensky and his friends will tell you they're making these changes because the people running the anti-corruption stuff had ties to Russia. Okay, that's what we've gone through. Russian propaganda, and we're sharing intel with the FSB. Okay, could very well be true. I don't know the facts. I would say it probably is true. It definitely is true to some degree. That's been admitted by people involved with some of these organizations, right? Here's the key. But regardless, getting rid of the anti-corruption agencies is not the solution. So for him, he says that that's not the solution, and he actually goes to town even more on them later. I'll find where that is in a second. So here's Andrew just not holding back. Zelensky not having vetoed this idiotic bill already says everything you ever needed to know about him as a leader and as an individual. The persona he has presented to the world is bullshit, even with almost unanimous rejection within his country and from outside partners. He isn't backing down. When you screw up so badly that all of your enemies tell you to stop and all of your allies tell you to stop, it's a pretty good sign to stop. So he's gone to town on Zelensky. I wouldn't say that there's almost unanimous rejection, because at the end of the day, it had a massive parliamentary support. And there are other opinions on this that I've heard from people in Ukraine that don't actually fully see it like that. But nonetheless, Andrew and many others are particularly unhappy about this law being signed off. SBU chief Vasil Malyuk met with G7 ambassadors defending recent actions against anti-corruption bodies NABU and SAPO by stating the agency will continue rooting out Russian agents in all Ukrainian state bodies. Quote, no institution is exempt, he said, adding that NABU must be cleansed of hostile influence and that solid evidence has been gathered against suspected staff. So that's the government's position. And I think it's probably true, but yet again, we come back to, but is this the right way of dealing with that? Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, so the OECD, has warned Ukraine that the attack on anti-corruption agencies will negatively affect defense investments and reconstruction financing. The head of the OECD's anti-corruption division said the law significantly undermines the independence of Ukraine's specialized anti-corruption agencies. My position would be, we'll get in some outsiders then. Get in some international people to head up those institutions. Let it be run by the OECD or similar. Ilya Ponomarenko here says, makes you wonder what kind of massive shit they've got on someone from Zelensky's inner circle for the bill to pass the Rada and get signed into law in such a wild rush. This happened really quickly. It happened with a really big majority, but it's a weird majority though as well. And I can't quite understand why some of the opposition came together with Servant of the People Party to pass this fairly massively. But it did get passed through pretty quickly. So, Ilya Ponomarenko could be onto something there. Divana here, again, says, Ukraine is about to lose the very institutions that made its anti-corruption reforms real. President's office has proposed a draft law and it's a ticking bomb. If passed, it will grant blah, blah, blah. So she's not happy in practice. This means no more real investigations into political corruption, no more justice for high-level crimes, no more European integration. According to Ukraine's own watchdogs, this law may kill our path to the EU. Now they say it's not even about joining, it's about saving visa-free travel. The ruling party has enough votes to push this law into opposition support. Without opposition support, this is how systems die, not in revolutions, but by silent majorities voting yes. It is, and she goes, it's a really involved thread, lots of discussion about how it came to pass. That was as it was happening. As it got passed through Parliament. So she was not happy and is not happy. Now, Tatarugami has a thread. Let's just go through this to kind of finish off the video. To understand what triggered the protests and the unexpected reaction in Ukraine, it's essential to know the context, especially for those who don't follow Ukrainian internal politics. First, the protest isn't aimed at the president personally, but at a specific law passed yesterday. It's no secret that Ukraine has struggled with corruption. That was one of the main drivers behind the 2013-14 protests, which eventually led to President Yanukovych being ousted. In the years that followed, Ukraine created specialized anti-corruption institutions to fight it. These institutions were strongly supported and even required by the EU and Western partners as conditions for deeper integration and the visa-free regime. The goal was to establish bodies that were independent of presidential control and subject to civilian oversight. To that end, a separate civilian commission was created to ensure that appointments to the heads of anti-corruption agencies would be transparent and merit-based, not simply direct presidential appointments. There are ongoing debates about the effectiveness of these agencies, and I won't attempt to assess them. That's beyond my expertise. Still, they have handled several high-profile cases involving judges, members of parliament and top officials. One of the core issues in Ukraine has been the president's appointed loyalists to key institutions like the Prosecutor General's Office, the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the Security Service. These appointees could bury investigations that were politically inconvenient. In such a system, it made sense to have a semi-independent anti-corruption body capable of investigating figures at the highest levels of government, even those close to the president. The new law amends the current anti-corruption framework and gives the Prosecutor General, who is appointed by the president, the broad authority to reassign cases from anti-corruption agencies to other bodies under direct presidential control. In practice, this means that any corruption investigation targeting people in the president's inner circle or political allies could be taken away and potentially derailed. Not just Zelensky, but any president. That's why many people reacted strongly against it. Yes, before the vote, the SBU raided the NABU, National Anti-Corruption Bureau, one of the anti-corruption bodies, claiming links to Russia and suggesting that some employees were compromised. However, not long ago, multiple high-ranking SPU officers, as well as some in the armed forces, were arrested for collaborating with Russia. So it's unclear how placing NABU and SAPO, another anti-corruption body, under the same framework as the SBU would make it better. Using that logic, one could argue that every institution, including Parliament, which has also been infiltrated by Russian agents, should be placed under presidential control. Clearly, that line of reasoning doesn't hold water. Whether the public reaction is exaggerated or justified isn't for me to judge, but this context is important for anyone unfamiliar with the Ukraine's internal politics to understand why the backlash occurred. So, My position, as I've said, is that there's probably some justification for this happening, in principle, but it's the wrong course of action that has the wrong optics. At the very least, it's got the wrong optics. So one of my commenters on the video yesterday said, this is Julie Lab saying, as always, big thanks for the interesting stream, Jonathan. We both did a stream on this last night. The crackdown on independent anti-corruption agencies is worrisome. Over at Vlad Vexler, I found this explanation by someone, quote, it all happens alongside major security service of Ukraine investigation against high-ranking officials in those agencies, with evidence implying they were part of the Russian FSB-controlled network, which was using their position in those agencies to spy on Ukrainian officials and cover up for businesses who were working on Russia inside Ukraine, working for Russia. This law seems to be a much over-the-top reaction to those agencies, not just doing their jobs, but also being actively detrimental by using their independence to shelter Russian agents. The situation is bad, no matter how you slice it, and that's sad. Ukrainians are upset and lost. So to me, that kind of sums it up, which is, yeah, something needs to happen, but this is bad no matter what happens here. Like, this is a classic dilemma. There's what's the least worst option, and I'm not sure the Zelensky administration has chosen the least worst option. I'm sure there'll be other options that would be available to root out those people, whether it just be some one-off investigations that root them out and then let it continue to be independent, but with some oversight into who's working for them. I don't know how you do that so it can maintain its independence, or you can ask outside agencies to come in, or I don't know. I'm sure there are other better options, but I'm also sure that there were some pretty fundamental problems with these organizations to warrant them doing something that is so deeply unpopular. That these are you do SWOT analyses and cost benefit analyses of these kind of decisions. You're like, well, this is going to really suck. We're going to lose popularity. We're going to be attacked internationally. It's going to be used as ammunition by people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. But they did it anyway, right? And so therefore there has to be significant enough benefit to them. And is that benefit just like self-preservation? Is that what it is? Are they just protecting their own from being investigated? In which case, that's incredibly problematic. So I'm sure there are two sides to this story. I'm leaning on this not being good for Ukraine, but there was an issue there at the heart of it that needed to be solved. This is just the wrong way of solving it. Anyway, that's my tuppence, but take it with a pinch of salt because I'm no expert here. Appreciate your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.